if you are not Punjabi, Bengali, Tamil, you are not South Asian. And so that was a really interesting thing where I always had, Afro-Caribbean friends, I always had South Asian friends, but it definitely seemed like from both sides, you were being made to perform. The Afro-Caribbean people would be, do you know this calypso artist? Do you know this reggae artist? And the South Asians would go, do you know who Muhammad Rafi is? Do you know who Asha Bose is? And so there was often that testing, right? Having to be on like a performance scale. And so that was kind of interesting there, but it didn't make me any less proud of who I was because even though there was the South Asians and there were the Caribbean people, I still was fortunate enough to have my Indo-Caribbean space. So I could kind of, play the role that they need me to in the Caribbean space. I can walk into a Jamaican restaurant and order food, no problem. I can walk into an Indian restaurant and order food, no problem.
Welcome to the Logistics Monk Show. I'm your host, Ryan Mohammed. This is the first episode that I've decided to kind of start this journey in terms of. Welcome to the Logistics Monk Show. I'm your host, Ryan Mohammed. This is the first episode of, I'm hoping that it's going to be a lot, but what I wanted to do and my intention for starting this Logistics Monk Show is to talk to people from various walks of life, get to understand who they are, where they've gone, and where they want to go. And as many people would know, I'm a co-host on a show called Sales Chatter Live every single day, and we just really focus on sales and logistics. But for me, I feel like there's more. There's more to my identity, more to things that I want to talk about, more discussions I want to have with people. And our first guest today is actually the CEO and founder of the Cutlass Magazine. The Cutlass Magazine is an online resource where Vinay Harrichan, who is like the founder and CEO of it, he basically posts different. Yeah. Welcome to the Logistics Monk Show. I'm your host, Ryan Mohammed. This is the first episode that I'm hoping kind of takes off a little bit, but if one person can find value out of this, I'm excited and I've done my job. My intention for this show is to have conversations with various people from different walks of life. I'm currently a co-host on a show called Sales Chatter Live, and we go live every single day where we talk about logistics and sales in general. But I had a conversation with a friend a couple weeks ago, and it really made me think about what am I giving back? And for me, I've always been a fan of media. So I hope that you join us on this amazing journey that I'm about to take. And for our first guest, we have the CEO and founder of the Cutlass Magazine, Vinay Harrichan. Vinay has decided to basically make this online resource for many Indo-Caribbeans out there like myself so that we can learn about our culture, our history, growing up in the Indo-Caribbean. A lot of us are in Canada, like myself, or in the US, or spread across the world. But the knowledge that he gives as a database, there's not enough resources for us to go to. So he started the Cutlass Magazine during the pandemic. So we're extremely excited. I want to welcome Vinay Harichan over to the Logistics Monk Show, episode 1. And I hope that you all have fun and find value out of it. Thank you.
I'm doing really well. I think this is the first time someone has referred to me as a CEO, so I think I'm liking that. But yeah, I'm doing well, and I feel very honored to be on, the first episode. So thank you for having me.
No, 100%. And yes, you're the CEO, man. You're CEO of your life. And we're excited to kind of see the growth and learn a little bit about you. And that's one of the most important things that we want to do is like learn about the person and then learn about the profession. So, Vinay, CEO of the Cutlass Magazine,
Mhm.
thoughts, my friend. What do you think when something like that is spoken?
Um, Honestly, it's kind of hard to believe because when I had first started the page, in late 2020, August of 2020, I kind of just did not have any expectations. And so to be here 2.5 years later, approaching 3 years, it's really nice to see that the page has continued and opened up a lot of opportunities for me and continued to be respected. And so I really enjoyed seeing the growth, all things that I could have never planned for.
Of course. And It's amazing to kind of see. So we'll definitely, it's the Cutlass Magazine on Instagram, I believe, Vinay. Is there any, I think there's a podcast as well. Can you just talk a little bit about
Yeah.
where basically people can find you?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a funny thing. It originally was meant to just be a podcast, and it is available on Spotify, iTunes, Deezer, JioSaavn, all of those streaming applications. But there's only about 4 episodes so far, and the reason being that when I had started the podcast, I was doing a lot of things and it was kind of difficult to continue releasing the episodes. I went more on the social media direction, but coming on to shows like this and this new year has definitely inspired me to want to get back to that more. So currently, all of the main content is on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok at Cutlass Magazine.
And that's one of the amazing things that I see all of, like, I think I just saw like the Johnny Lever and Raymond Ramarine posts everywhere. Anytime I go on social media, I love to kind of see that and get that little bit of an awareness. We'll talk about the Cutlass a little bit later, but I want to get to know Vinay today because I think that's the identity and that's what's really important to all of us that everybody can relate to. I know that you grew up, I believe, in Coral Springs, Florida. Can you talk
Mhm.
to myself and everybody in the audience here about what your what was your childhood? What did that look like? What did it like? What was around you? What was available? And what was your childhood like in Coral Springs, Florida?
Yeah, and so kind of before getting to Coral Springs, I was born in Trinidad, and my family is all from Central. And when I was 3.5, that's when we moved to Coral Springs, Florida. We had one aunt and one uncle, both my mom's siblings, living there at the time. And so I grew up in an area called Coral Springs near Margate, which is all in South Florida. And the reason why I specify is because there's a very large Indo-Caribbean community there, and people who might have relatives living in Florida, there's a high likelihood that they would have relatives from that area. So I was very fortunate to grow up in Coral Springs where there were, the Indo-Caribbean mandirs or temples, the grocery stores, the cultural centers, the community events, the pagoda in the park, the Diwali Nagar, all of that stuff. And I grew up in a typical Trinidadian working class family. My parents now are business owners, but at the time they just worked for, typical working class jobs. My mom worked at a clothing store. My dad worked at a welding company. And I wasn't one of those people that had a lot of family living here. I know some people come over and they bring the whole brood of their grandparents and all their aunts and uncles and all of that. It wasn't a lot of us. There was just a couple, one aunt, one uncle. My uncle hadn't had children as yet. My aunt only has 2 sons and their spouses, and that was really it. The vast majority of my family continues to live back home in Trinidad. But I was still very fortunate that every school I went to, I could go to, Publix, our local grocery store here, and there would be an Indo-Caribbean person there. So I never felt alone in that regard. And so, yeah, I definitely grew up feeling very close to the culture.
And as you mentioned, like you said, you always had that piece of culture with you. How often, like, do you guys go back to Trinidad on a yearly basis? You would say.
Well, the funny thing is that my parents are actually there right now, and my Didi, my big sister, she was just there. I haven't been back in a little while. It took a while for us to be able to go back because, as I think a lot of people probably know, there's a lot of issues with immigration and green cards and all of that stuff, and it takes a while. So it was a very long time before we were able to go back. But now my parents, my sister, they go back very regularly. But Trinidad was always a part of my growing up. I think because we had so little family here, that meant that there were so many people visiting, and those people were always staying with us. So it seemed like at least a couple times for the year, there would always be someone coming, and they would have the 2 large suitcases full of bobby and tamarind chutney and pepper roti and dal puri and all of that stuff. And so I always had pieces of Trinidad flowing into my life. And I think that's why I was able to keep up the accent and stuff like that. So Trinidad is still very near and dear to me.
And I love that you said that. That is a part of your identity. And we'll get to your accent because I think
Mhm.
for us, so a little bit of my backstory as well, Vinay, is that my parents actually came here with nobody. It was just
Mhm,
my mom and my dad, and they had to build. My mom here came here pregnant with me in Toronto, and they had to make friends. And you mentioned that you had like cultural centers and Mundirs and
mhm,
Had Holy and Pagua and the park and all that fun stuff. And yeah, that was the way that my parents were able to make friends, was through our local temple. You have different Trinidadians and you get to know each other and things like that. And I love that you said that it was always had access to things. I was actually at the Dollar Tree on Friday in my
mhm,
area, and I actually saw a Sunshine Snacks chips. I think it's
mhm,
Zoomers or something like that, cheese snack. There, and I sent it to my mom right away just to kind of know that even for us, getting like those solo in like
mhm.
the solo pops in like those little kind of
Yeah.
containers was a big difference. So knowing that you grew up you immersed yourself into our culture and your identity, was there
Mhm,
any kind of drawbacks that you kind of saw growing up that you wish that, hey, now it would have been a little bit
mhm.
different?
Yeah, I grew up, as I mentioned, with a lot of Trinidadian people, but my parents are very particular about us being me and my siblings, not getting involved in that kind of vetting, liming scene because it just seemed like, and I only want to speak for the people in my community. Obviously, I know it's different for everybody, but a lot of the people that I knew around the time when they turned, 14, 15, 16, that's when they start drinking with their aunts and uncles. That's when they start going to parties. That's when they have someone, a relative who's working at a club that gets them into a club. And they noticed that there was a lot of people, a lot of Trinidadian kids, a lot of Guyanese kids who in high school were starting to get more involved in that scene as opposed to their academic schoolwork, or that was becoming a priority for them. And so they were very strict about not, getting us involved in that scene. They didn't feel comfortable really drinking in front of us drinking in front of them. And I think that could be specific to my family because I think, as a lot of people can probably relate to, alcoholism or, alcohol overconsumption can be an issue for a lot of people. And so I think that's kind of a time when in my teens where there was a little bit more of a separation where I wasn't too much involved with, in the Caribbean social circles because that was kind of synonymous with alcohol. And so I think that was when there was more of a split. I always had Trinidadian friends, but then I also had, Latino friends. I'm in South Florida. I also had Caribbean friends, South Asian friends. And I did get more involved with like the Caribbean associations at my school, the South Asian associations. But I typically wouldn't be too close with some of the Trinidadian kids that kind of all went together and party together and stuff like that. But I think that that was a really interesting time because it allowed me to develop a bunch of different interests. And then when I got old and I started hanging around more Trinidadian people, I think it gave me an interesting perspective, a kind of an outsider as well as insider perspective.
I love that you said that because it is so true. Like, growing up in our home is like, hey, you go to a party, hey, take a shot now, boy. You don't want to like, even myself, I've been alcohol free for like this the beginning of this year. I wasn't a heavy drinker or anything like that, but I just
Yeah.
decided, hey, it's not something that I want to do for myself. But when you said that, hey, you hung around in different circles and never felt alone, how did conversations with like you said, your Latino friends and any other
Mhm.
groups of circles of like your identity kind of come across? Because one thing I noticed, Vinay, when I was growing up and people would ask, "Hey, what kind of music do you listen to?" I would never say I listen to chutney, I listen to Bollywood, I listen to reggae,
Mhm.
soca, and even like the genre reggae, people automatically assume Bob Marley, right? So there's
Yeah.
those preconceived notions. How did you balance your Trinidadian identity with the
Mhm.
outside world?
I think I was very lucky in that where I grew up, there was a tremendous amount of diversity. So any classroom that I was in at school, at least half the people were from minority backgrounds, if not more than half. And so it wasn't, it was kind of uncool to say that you only listen to American music or that you only listen to 80s, 90s pop music or stuff like that, right? So people very much celebrated loving hip hop or reggae or jazz or soca music or calypso or chutney or Bollywood, stuff like that. So I never really felt ashamed of it per se. And I think that was very unique to me because I think it kind of all depends on, your childhood circumstances. And I grew up with some Indo-Caribbean people that definitely were made to feel less about their culture and where they came from and they tried to assimilate. But at that stage of my life when I was younger, I was kind of one of those people where I never really wanted to fit in, and I kind of liked very much being different, so I leaned into those differences, and if people tried to make fun of me, it kind of never I never took them seriously because I didn't really take anything they said, very seriously, but I was just that kid from an early age that if there was any incidences of people trying to make me feel less, it didn't really affect me. However, it affected a lot of people I know. So I definitely saw that growing up where there would be people who would never talk about chutney music, never talk about soca music. They would use their English call name or their English name if they had it. And so they tried very much to assimilate or not show that culture publicly. Whereas I think for me, I liked whatever kind of made me different.
You embraced it, and that's a part of who you are. And look at the success that you've had with the page, and even in your own your personal and professional life. I
Yeah.
would say that you're definitely have somebody with that power to kind of share with everybody, which I definitely do appreciate. Vinay, can you talk a little bit about how the page, the Cutlass, got started, why it got started, and we'll go to the origin story for anybody who's a comic book nerd like myself. We always kind of get into the origin story of how it kind of
Mhm.
happened. But where do you want to see the future of the magazine kind of go forward? But I'd love to hear the origin story and then kind of
Mhm.
piggyback off of that.
Yeah, so getting to the origins, it's hard to imagine, but 3 years ago exactly, a large, global pandemic started. And a couple months into that, I really started thinking, at the time I was a full-time graduate student, getting my degree in software engineering. I was working as a math and science teacher. I had an additional writing job, and I was very, very busy. And my personality trait is that when I'm very, very busy, I kind of look for something else I could do to make me even more busy. And I was thinking, I really want to have something to show for all this time that I'm spending at home. And that was a time when everybody seemed to be on Instagram Live and sharing all of their life. People who I knew who had completely sawn off social media was suddenly posting every day and had every account. And then there was something called TikTok coming out. And I thought, well, you know what? I kind of want to get onto these platforms, because I was not very active on social media at all. I was not someone who posted a lot on Instagram. Facebook was just to keep up with who in Trinidad had a new baby or got married and stuff. And I was not on Twitter, TikTok. And so I thought, I'm seeing some pages on social media, they're trying to showcase Indo-Caribbean culture more, and I felt like there was a certain niche of, topics about history and culture and the things that I immediately associate with my identity that I wasn't necessarily seeing showcased online. And so I thought I'll just start this page because I'm always complaining, and my mom and my sisters were kind of like, "Well, why are you complaining? Just do something." And so I created the Cutlass. That name was, I came up with that name in literally maybe like an hour. It was not something I thought about too much, but then I kind of realized I was considering I would change it later on, just create it, save the handle, and then change it later on, maybe to like the Indo-Caribbean Association or the Indo-Caribbean Collective, something kind of more standard. But as I started to think about it, I realized that Cutlass is something you and I probably both have, or probably have both grown up with, right? And it has been a through line in all of our stories. And when you say Cutlass, people from the Indo-Caribbean community know that. People from other communities will not know that. But for most of us, we can identify that. And so I decided to keep it, hopped on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok came a little bit later on. But yeah, August 2020 is when I really started thinking, maybe I can share all of the things I've been learning all these years, and maybe we could get into that. But I started kind of just self teaching myself things about the culture and community, because after both my grandmothers passed away, my auntie and nanny, when I was a young teenager, I kind of realized how much had gone with them. And I started learning more about who we are and where we came from. And I figured I need some place to put all of that. Well, here's social media during a time when everybody is stuck at home. Let's see what happens.
And it was so amazing to kind of see when you kind of go through the posts to learn about different identities. I think one of them that stuck out with me that I kind of want to talk about was, I think it was a tweet or something like that you made like during Ramadan. You like to look make halwa and sawine, and then you like to listen to Trinidad classical legends like the late Hanif
Mhm.
Muhammad, Jamir Hussein. and Yusuf Khan. And I play Dolak. I've been playing Dolak for X amount of years, and I've kind of
Mhm,
grown up in that Trinidad classical genre. So it was really cool to kind of see that. I love that, and it actually brings a topic of unity because when you listen to their music, these guys are Muslim men who've passed away, but I know for a fact that these guys can chant Ramayana like nothing. You know, when they go and they do their
mhm,
cooking night or the peacock night, as they would call it, where they're kind of battling off with other people, and even like the songs and the tilana, the tumris, all that stuff that they've done themselves. Can you
mhm,
talk about what that Indo Caribbean looks like? Because in Toronto, what I see, Vinay, is that anytime there's a Caribbean event, there's
mhm,
more of a spotlight on the Afro Caribbean, right? So Jamaica,
mhm,
Barbados. Like if I go to a Caribbean event, it's like, oh, you'll get jerk chicken, you know, when I want to see doubles and
mhm,
pilori, you know? So, and I feel like
mhm,
when I'm being Indo-Caribbean, we only talk about curry, you know, like that's our curry
mhm,
and rum, right? So can you talk a
mhm.
little bit about that?
Yeah, for me growing up in South Florida, there was definitely a very dominant Caribbean group, and that Caribbean group was Jamaican, Haitian, and then, other smaller islands, but it was never Trinidadian, Guyanese, Surinamese, Indo-Jamaican. And then there was the South Asian group, and that was often dominated by the Indian people, as some Trinidadians people call them, India Indian. And then obviously you had, the Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, Sri Lankans, people like that. And so one thing I've drawn parallel to before is the fact that I was part of both the Caribbean Student Association and I was part of the Indian Student Association at my high school and throughout schooling. And I remember wanting to run for a position at the Caribbean Student Association, and they told me that I didn't look like somebody who would head the Caribbean Student Association. And so I ran for a position at the Indian one, and I was able to do so. But when it came to wanting to showcase chutney music or doubles and dalpuri and stuff like that, I was told that that wasn't an accurate representation of Indian culture, of South Asian culture. And so I kind of found myself in between that position a lot, where if you were not Jamaican, you were not Haitian, you were not Korean, if you were not Punjabi, Bengali, Tamil, you were not South Asian. And so that was a really interesting thing where I always had, Afro Caribbean friends, I always had South Asian friends, but it definitely seemed like from both sides, you were being made to perform. The Afro-Caribbean people would be, "Do you know this calypso artist? Do you know this reggae artist?" And the South Asians would go, "Do you know who Muhammad Rafi is? Do you know who Asha Bose is?" And so there was often that testing, right? Having to be on like a performance scale. And so that was kind of interesting there, but it didn't make me any less proud of who I was because even though there was the South Asians and there were the Caribbean people, I still was fortunate enough to have my Indo-Caribbean space. So I could kind of, play the role that they need me to in the Caribbean space. I can walk into a Jamaican restaurant and order food, no problem. I can walk into an Indian restaurant and order food, no problem. But I always had my Indo-Caribbean spaces to go back to and feel complete in and whole in. And I think for a lot of my other friends who are outside that, whether they were European, Latino, East Asian, they would kind of think, oh, you're Indian from the West Indies, but you're also South Asian. And I would say, yeah. And then they go, okay, cool. And they didn't really think about it too much. But yeah.
I like that you said that because we're often kind of saying that too. Because even my sister like singing bhajans and things like that. We've got
Mhm,
like East Indians coming up to me and be like, "Oh, you can speak Hindi," and it's like, no. And then you start to think in your
mhm,
head, like, why don't I know Hindi if we're
mhm,
singing in Sanskrit and all these things, right? What that we're speaking of. In your own opinion, where do you think the older generation, like you said, you mentioned that your Aji and your Nani, they passed away with information, right? They it wasn't able
mhm,
to pass on other than yourself, and you're spreading that light. But the older generation and like the generation that we're a part of right now, where do you see that there's an opportunity to basically share that wealth?
I think a lot of it, or a lot of what I love in that regard is the music, because, even people who grow up in areas where there weren't a lot of Indo-Caribbean people, within their home, I find that a lot of them did have that connection to Indo-Caribbean music, whether it was chutney. And for a lot of people, there's a certain nostalgic tie there. And I think nostalgia is a really interesting thing in our community. The way that you'll watch, young guys like me and you listen to a Muhammad Rafi song from the 50s or the 60s. Like that's a very particular thing about our community. And we continue to play the same Kanchan and Baba songs or Sundar Popo songs that have been out for an entire generation, 40 years, some of them, right? And I think for us, the music is oftentimes a way for people like me who have lost the most of the elders in their family, a way to connect to those elders, to remember them, to start conversations in their family. It's very intricately linked to nostalgia. And that's why I started doing those song translations. And when I started doing those song translations on the platform, I had people reaching out to me going, for the first time in my life, I really want to know what these songs mean. I'm thinking about starting to learn Hindi. I'm thinking about wanting to learn Hindustani. I signed up for a Hindi class. Do you recommend any books? And I found that the music got a lot of people to think about their culture in a new way because it exposed to a lot of people who might have thought that they were experts about their culture, that they knew everything, that there's a certain degree of things that they do not know. There's some people who told me, I never really thought that I would want to know what these songs mean. And then you started posting about it. And now I want to know what every word of every song means. And I think music is a huge way to do that. And from music, I know I post mainly about chutney music, but I want to be able to talk about birha music and tumri and tan and, dropid and all of those different forms of local classical that I've loved and that I still listen to today. I go and I play my Jameer Hussain record or my Yusuf Khan record or my Kung V. Harris sing for people who know him, James Ram Sowak, all of those people. And I love listening to that music. I know a lot of other people who love listening to that music. And I think when you rebrand that music and you make it cool and you show that young people still have an interest in it, I think that's a really great way to continue inspiring things about the culture.
And that's what I love that you said that because you keep on playing like these quote unquote oldies, but there's just there's an audience of people who've never heard this before, or
Mhm.
they've had those negative qualities or those thoughts about it. Like I know my mom would always kind of make a joke anytime like you hear like KB sing, as you kind of mentioned, oh, that old man music, like that's
Mhm.
that's music that wake music, right? You don't want to listen to that,
Mhm.
but you kind of give that, and you're able to give that to different people in quantities. You've built a community, Vinay, which it's not something that somebody plans to do, right? It just happens. You just
Mhm.
post your content like that. What is something that you're surprised about the community that you've built?
I think I'm very surprised about how engaged everyone is. Like, when I first started the page, I remember thinking to myself, if this thing gets 1,000 followers on Instagram, that would be a huge accomplishment, right? Because for me at the time, I was thinking, I have no idea what will come of this. I don't have my finger on the pulse of where Indo Caribbean youth between the age of 15 to 45 lie in terms of their interest in music or culture or language and stuff like that. And so I just decided I'll throw things out there, see what people respond to. And I've been very, very pleasantly surprised about how people have responded to the post, how they've continued to want to learn, how they've reached out to me directly to express gratitude, and also how knowledgeable so many people are. Like I'll have people reach out to me and say, "Hey, my family still sings birha, and we're the only family that does it, and it's just been passed down generation to generation. Would you like to speak to my great grandfather who's 89?" And so that's something where, you can kind of think from a high level view that maybe the youth is lost and they don't know what they're doing and they don't know the culture. But then you get all these individual people reaching out and saying, "Do you want to talk to this person?" Or "I have this book I could send you." Or "Look at these family photographs I've kept. Look at this family jewelry I have." You start to think, there are people out there who have that interest and have been doing their own archival work and wanting to uncover their family stories, and they too just didn't have a platform really to share it. And I think it's easy for everyone to feel like they're the only ones doing something, but then when you put it out there, that's when you can get the response to let you know that other people are interested. So I definitely was going to into it maybe being a little bit negative or I guess skeptical, but I like to think that I was kind of proven wrong and that people have been very enthusiastic about the content. Mhm. Oh, the audio's cutting out for me. Sorry.
Apologies, I should have
Mhm.
put myself on mute. It's amazing that you kind of say that in terms of, people, the reaction of people and just the conversations that you have sparked with people who are like, hey, I was kind of gatekeeping this information for myself because I
Mhm.
didn't have somewhere to kind of share it. Where do you kind of see the future of this? Is this something that you kind of want to build a database, something like a Wikipedia, something like that?
Mhm.
Because when I look at it, I remember in my elementary going to library. If I want to do something on Trinidad, right, there would be just one book in the library that I
Mhm.
kind of have to quote my sources from. But where do you want to see this kind of grow?
Yeah, and that you mentioned one word there that I always like to use, gatekeep. I find that there has throughout our history always been a certain gatekeeping, and whenever that happens, I feel like it's just a loss for all of us. And a huge reason why I've been able to learn so much that I've been able to at this point is speaking to elders in our community who freely give all the information that they know to me and teach me so much. And I think I'm hoping to get rid of that gatekeeping mentality and show people that the culture is for all of us and it benefits all of us, and that to share what you know and to not think that somebody's going to copy you or take from you. If they do, it's fine in the grand scheme of things. It really doesn't matter. What matters is the collective benefit to people. And so I hope that this platform is an impetus for other people to start sharing as well. And then in terms of tangible things, I do want to obviously have the magazine become more of, instead of just a social media page, have an online landing page where people can go, and it's a website and you can, type in Ananyankaran Nanda Baba and then the translation comes up, right? Or you can go and be like, what's that style of music that those people would sing and they were very loud and people would say that they used to mine cows, and you could look it up and you'd say, oh, the Ahir people and Biraha music and Ahir Wakinach and stuff like that. And so I want to be able to have a platform that is a landing page for the culture. Because I remember the days of typing in Indo-Caribbean on Google and one New York Times article would come up and one Wikipedia article would come up, and every 6 months I would just go and refresh and refresh and refresh. And they might add some things, but very little. And so I'm hoping that I can provide everything I've learned, whether it's music, language, stuff like that, all onto an online platform to people to access and to show to their kids. Some people actually told me that during the pandemic, they wanted to supplement their kids' education. So they started actually looking at my posts to to teach their kids about Indo-Caribbean culture. People who were living in parts of Canada where they weren't Indo-Caribbean people, or parts of the US where they weren't Indo-Caribbean people. And so to have a more tangible resource for them would be really awesome. And then from an archival perspective, I've been working on documenting a lot of folk songs, particularly I love local classical music, but my favorite genre of music are women's wedding songs and like bird songs, the soha, and how the older women would get on and sing and dance and all of that. And so I've been documenting a lot of those songs, and eventually I want to be able to publish it somewhere so that if somebody 50 years from now goes, I want to learn Trinidadian folk wedding song, they'll type it on Google and they'll see there's a book of Trinidadian local wedding songs or Indo-Caribbean local wedding songs. And so working on creating tangible things like that as well, not just the social media to have people engage online, but for people to have books and archives. And I have to get around to digitizing all this music I have so that people can listen to it on YouTube or, have a device they have. And so, yeah, continuing to post on social media, grow that following, but have material things that people can get their hands on.
And all of that stems from why. Like I
Mhm.
remember like when a kid in I'm Hindu, so when a kid's born and you cut their hair and like you want to ask
Mhm.
why, but you kind of grew up in that kind of generation of like keep your mouth shut, don't ask anything. But now we're a more
Mhm.
curious generation that we live in. Is there certain questions that you're still trying to figure out? Like you want to learn a little bit more? I know you mentioned with like the wedding songs and you're going through that, but is there certain things that you because even for myself, I didn't know that like there's a Madrasi community, there's a Fiji community, which is out there. Like even
Mm.
for myself as a musician, I want to know why their dolak players play two dolaks, right?
Mhm.
Is there certain questions out there that you
Mm.
want to personally know and you want to research yourself?
Yeah, I definitely want to learn more about, the Indians that went to Fiji and Mauritius and South Africa. I have sort of a passable knowledge, but I definitely want to learn more about them and pass on that information to Indo-Caribbean people to show our similarities and differences. And then also just learning more about, where we come from, because one thing that I feel very sad about is the fact that that older generation of people that I interview, unfortunately, because of the way time works, they'll all be gone in 20 years, right? So there's women that I talk to who can still speak Hindustani, who still wear their orhani every day, and they're few and far between, but they're still there. They're in their 90s, and some of them in their early hundreds. And in 10 years, 20 years, they won't be there anymore. So for me, it's really about learning as much from them as I possibly can and making sure that I learn in a way that pays tribute to them, and I'm not passing on wrong words, wrong meanings, telling people to sing songs for the wrong occasions. I want to pass on substantial information, but also correct information, and information that pays tribute to the way that older generation had a mastery of their culture and traditions. And so whether it's coming out with a songbook, whether it's coming out with a book that says, this is all the stuff you need for a matikor, this is all the stuff you need for a muran or a child shaving ceremony. If you want to learn some birha, here's a little pamphlet of books of birha you could learn and what the meaning is and how to sing it. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I want to learn. I've been fortunate to have learned a lot because before I started the Cutlass, I was doing this sort of research kind of on my own and independently for maybe about 5 or 6 years before I started the Cutlass. So I was able to learn a lot. But yeah, there's obviously always more to learn, always more to become an expertise in. I think for me, growing up, one of the things I kind of have wanted to do in recent years was learn how to play the dolak. And I think when you're younger, you don't really think about it, and sometimes you ask someone to teach you, and they might charge a certain amount of money that you can't afford. But now as an adult, I'm thinking more about, besides what I'm teaching people on social media, what am I going to teach people in my own family when I have kids, when my sisters have kids? And I know that there are certain things I want them to grow around with. I want them to grow up with somebody beating a drum and singing, songs in Bhojpuri. And so who's gonna have to learn that? I'm gonna have to learn that. And so yeah, for me it's also a personal thing as well as continuing to share on the Cutlass.
That is amazing, and I can't thank you enough for coming here. So I got one final question for you, Vinay, and I do want to get, it's a question and answer that I'm going to ask you here. What is
Mm.
a question that you hoped that I asked you today, and your answer?
What is a question I hoped you'd ask? Oh, I think maybe I would have hoped for you to ask me about the language, and that's something I was hoping to bring up. What is Hindustani? How did you learn Hindustani? What do you think about Hindustani in the future of our community? I was very fortunate that my great grandfather, my Parnana, he used to actually teach Hindustani and the Ramayan in Trinidad. And so, because of that, my nanny learned how to speak a lot. And in my family in general, I find that they know a lot of words and phrases that would always be passed down. Words like puha and janjat and kukre and pasre and stuff like that, right? Paisa, pani, daru. And so I grew up with a lot of those words, but I made a very concerted effort to learn formal Hindi, and from formal Hindi, start learning more Bhojpuri, start learning the song lyrics and seeing how the Bhojpuri grammar works. And so for me, one of the things about the page that I'm most passionate about is continuing to show people that the language is not dead and maybe inspire people to want to learn Hindi, to want to learn Hindustani, and have more of an emphasis on the fact that hopefully sometime in the future I can participate in creating resources where that will be an opportunity, where someone who's Trinidadian or Guyanese will say, I really want my kids to learn that language that my great grandparents spoke or that my grandparents spoke, depending on the generation. And there'll be resources for them to do that. And so I would like to think that my grandchildren and great grandchildren will still be calling people puha and still using words like um, janjat and kucho and stuff like that. So that's something I always like to talk about the language because I feel like it doesn't get covered enough or it doesn't get praised enough, and I always like to give it a degree of attention.
Yeah, I appreciate that. You gotta come back. We'll bring you back on, and we'll do an
Mhm,
episode on language and kind of get a feedback from there. How can the audience get a hold of you? Can you plug your Instagram page, your Twitter page, all that stuff? And if they want to reach out to you personally, get to know you and ask you some questions,
mhm,
hopefully it doesn't get blown up too much. But
mhm,
because I know, if for a fun fact for the audience out there, I personally thought that the Cutlass was a team, like a team of
mhm.
at least a couple people, but our man Vinay here is doing everything by himself. So kudos to you and all the hard work that you've done. But yeah, can you plug how we can get a hold of you?
Yeah, people always think it's a team, and then when they find out that it's one person, that they think it's like a older lady in like her 40s or 50s because of the logo. But yeah, I'm always sad to disappoint people. But if you want to follow the page, it's at Cutlass Magazine on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok now. Fortunately or unfortunately, I'm getting used to that. And then you could always email me, cutlasspodcast@gmail.com. And my DMs are always open. They're always backed up because of the amount of DMs I get in a single day, but I will eventually get through them and respond to everyone in a timely manner.
All right. Well, like I said, I couldn't thank you enough for coming on the show. You took a chance with me here. I
Mhm,
knew that when I was kind of planning this out, when I was looking to, I haven't moved on from sales chatter yet, I would say. I'm still doing that on my end. But when I knew that I wanted to have a conversation like this, you were at the top of my list. So I can't thank you enough, brother, for spending your time with me and sharing your
mhm,
knowledge with everybody here. Um, can you talk a little bit about your thoughts about the show? I know that you mentioned the one thing, the question about the language, but how do you
mhm.
feel it went? And any kind of feedback would be great.
Yeah, I'm really happy to have been able to come on and talk a little bit about my personal life because I think people have reached out to me and are curious to know about my background. And rather than running through the same kind of 3 points all the time, it's nice to be able to expand on it and do it with somebody who I feel comfortable with and has a lot of similar cultural references to me. And I'm somebody who has seen your videos on YouTube as well, and so I've often admired your sister's singing skills, your Dolak skills, and you've been doing your part to obtain and maintain the culture for a very long time as well. So it's nice to be able to do this with somebody who I feel very akin to.
Thank you, brother, and that actually means a lot to that we can be familiar and make this like a safe space. So this is,
Mhm,
like I said, this is the first episode. I want to thank everybody. If you're watching this, you're definitely hitting this on the replay. We are airing every Monday at 5 p.m. And there's a reason why. I am a Lord Shiva Bhakt, so Mahadev
mhm,
Mondays is something that I've coined. So every Monday at 5 p.m., we'll be doing an episode of the Logistics Monk Show. If you found value in this, which I know you did, please share with a friend, a neighbor, some of your community. And my running joke, Vinay, is that I tell people to share this with the Amazon driver who's bringing your five
mhm.
packages to your house today, because we all
Yeah.
know you place an order on Amazon Prime. So, with that
Mhm.
being said, the Logistics Monk, thanks you so much. Ryan here, Vinay, thank you so much, brother, for coming out. Have an amazing week, and we'll see you guys next week.